Welcome to Voices and Votes, our special program on the annual plenary session of both the CPPCC, or Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the top political advisory body. I'm Yang Rui. The 13th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference starts its first annual session on Saturday. More than 2,000 members are gathering in Beijing to share their insights on China's major political, economic and social issues, and more than half are new members. What role does the CPPCC play in China's politics, and how can China best explain and respond to criticism about its political system? To discuss the many issues related to the CPPCC's annual meeting and consultative democracy in China, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Mo Tianchuan, a CPPCC member, and Professor Zhang Weiwei, Director of the China Institute at Fudan University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's take a look at this background report.
At the CPPCC opening session, Chairman Yu Zhengsheng delivered a work report on the committee's achievements last year. The report said the people's interest and well-being should be at the center of the CPPCC's work. It also stressed the importance of sticking to opening up policies and establishing good relations with other countries and international organizations.
We should serve the country's diplomacy, improve high-end exchanges, and promote the Belt and Road Initiative and strategic cooperation. We should tell the world about China's development and achievements, multi-party cooperation, and political consultation systems under the CPC's leadership, its socialist consultative democracy, and the theory of a community of a shared future.
This area is called the Delegates Corridor. Members are invited to speak to the media here, a new feature for this year's two sessions. 11 CPPCC members are invited to speak to the media today, including China's first space traveler, medical and agricultural officials, a member of the Winter Olympic Committee, and also an actress, as they are walking to the session's opening meeting.
China has made great progress in its space program in recent years, sending up a laboratory and several rockets. And it is at this delegates corridor that the country's first space traveler was able to share his expectations.
This new era is one of hard-working people, and we hope and invite more young people who are willing to join the program and put their hard work into the aerospace field. We hope together we can develop our country into a strong aerospace power. By doing so, we can live up to the expectations of our times.
Chairman Yu said advisors last year handed in 29,000 proposals, of which 24,000 pieces were registered and over 99% were handled. This year's two sessions adds a chance to deepen policies in order to better adapt to a new era.
Gentlemen, the outgoing chairman of CPPCC, Mr. Yu Zhengsheng, addressed a wide range of issues in his opening speech at the opening ceremony of CPPCC. What are the issues that have impressed you most about social development or economic construction?
I was at the site this afternoon and honored to be a member of the CPPCC. Responding to your questions, I think there are 2 or 3 aspects or topics which are very impressive to me. Number 1 is that everything should be under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, so including the CPPCC. That's the principle we need to stick to, for the stable and for the long-term development of China. So that's number 1. And secondarily, which impressed me is really the concentration on the social development or on the ordinary people's welfare thinking. So that's one thing I think which is very right to balance the development of the of a very fast developing country like China, a big country like China. And the third thing which is impressive to me is really the new members. Actually, the members of the CPPCC, most of them are new members. More than 60% are new members. I think these new members are going to contribute in a different way to the CPPCC in the coming 5 years.
Well, Professor Zhang, do you think the new faces will represent a new way of thinking in navigating our own course in their policy consultation?
Well, actually this time the reshuffling of such a scale is unprecedented in many ways. So I think most probably we are hoping for new blood and fresh ideas and thinking on China's new development. So this is crucial. Yeah.
And then China has allegedly entered into the era of middle-income economy. Therefore, people need to think more about how to balance social justice with economic development. Previously, we need to tackle the issue of efficiency or shortage of food and goods. Now, we are members of the well-off society. Bread and butter is no longer the issue for a vast majority, despite the poverty alleviation campaign. That's a top priority for President Xi Jinping since the 19th National Congress of the CPC. So what do you think of the importance of social development, and what do you think should be the prioritized issues on the agenda of Mr. Xi Jinping and his comrades in the boat of CPPCC, the political consultation, by the way?
I think that's really a challenging thing to the leadership of this country and also to the general society. China has experienced a very fast development stage in the past 30+ years. Actually, this year is our 40th anniversary of the reform. After that, our GDP has grown into a very large scale, which is a very solid second place in the whole world. The challenge now facing us is how to have a balanced development of the society, not like in the early times we are supporting some people getting rich, but now we are more focusing on how to balance the society, and we need to take care of those poor areas, like now we are doing this targeted poverty alleviation thing, which is very, very important. We have 3 years to achieve that goal, to lift all the poverty things in China. So that's one. The pollution or the environmental protection is also another aspect which is very important. Before we focus more on the GDP growth, and now we need a quality life. We need environmental to be safe. So I think that's another way of balanced development.
There seems to be a broad consensus shared by the Chinese at this moment that most of the 1.3 billion are beneficiaries in terms of the dividends of China's reform in this year that marks the 40th anniversary of China's opening up and reform. However, on the other hand, we do see the income disparity. The super rich are extremely rich, and yet we have millions of disadvantaged social groups, so those who need to be lifted out of poverty one way or another. How do you look at policy measures that need to be rolled out to quickly reduce the poverty and to level the playing field so that social justice is no longer just a matter of a sloganeering for this generation of the leadership?
From my analysis, actually, yes, the gap between rich and poor has expanded. Yet this kind of expansion is relative, because the low-income people have also improved their lives a lot. So the problem is the rich has become richer, but the vulnerable, the poorer, have become also much better. So it's a relative gap. Now, as Mr. Mo just mentioned, within 3 years, we are going to achieve the objective of eradicating poverty completely in China. So this is crucial. And we use different criteria. For instance, if you use Gini coefficient, and you find the gap is increasing. Now we find that even with Gini efficiency, if we measure province by province, within province, actually it's narrowing. Furthermore,
perhaps except for the 3 provinces in northeastern China, Heilongjiang, Jilin, Liaoning, where you could hardly have any serious investment beyond the Shanghai Guan.
it's a huge country, the size of 100 European states put
size
together.
Doesn't matter. You don't have a size that fits
but
all.
If you calculate by what I call my own criteria, if you look at the properties people have, even for these vulnerable people, I went to Guizhou to look at the poor regions. People have refrigerators, color television, bank, credit cards, and their own land. They don't have enough cash. So in our criteria, we use the World Bank criteria. These people belong to poor people. If we use different criteria, if you calculate their lands, their housing, then their situation is much better off.
Right. Now, can I use your English name, Vincent?
Sure.
Vincent, you are a newly appointed or elected member of the CPPCC. In what way have you got the membership? I mean, that has aroused enormous interest from overseas observers who say, well, come on, CPPCC is not part of Western parliamentary politics, it's not proportional representation, it's not certainly not part of competitive democracy. Let's take a closer look at the mechanism through which members are delivered, new members are delivered.
I think, first of all, I'm very honored to be a member of CPPCC again. The process, frankly, we look at this in two aspects. One aspect is that under the leadership of the Communist Party in China, and there is a series of criteria, so you have to meet, before you can be considered as a candidate. Number one, you need to be, you need to be representative in some fields or in some group of people. That's definitely number one. Number two, you need to be politically right. So that's also important. You need to recognize China's political system and China's road, its own road. So that's also very important. And thirdly, definitely you are again, you are doing very well in some field or some industry or some specialties. So that's very important. Those are the three things I think are very important. Other than that, another aspect is that you should not have something very bad things, bad things about you, like
track record of your life.
You need to be
should live up to the criteria.
Exactly, you need to be a good citizen and be a good businessman or be a good service guy in the government. So including tax issue, your discipline, and many other things. So that's second aspect. Combining these two things together. And the leadership, they are going to negotiate with the different parties and different organizations, and eventually they're going to have the final candidates out. That's the way I know.
I'm impressed by two issues you spoke of. One is representation of the profession, the other is integrity of the track record. What do you think of the way the membership is delivered?
Yeah, CPPC is the top advisory body in China. You mentioned the role of the leading role of the Chinese Communist Party, which is often misunderstood in the West. The Chinese Communist Party is not Republican Party or Democratic Party of the United States. By China's long tradition, it's always a unified ruling entity which represents or claims to represent the vast majority of the people of the society. I call the Western political party as partial interest party. Yeah, Donald Trump represents certain portion of the people. That's it. Yeah.
Well, white losers in the Rust Belt.
Yeah,
he represents the white losers in the Rust Belt.
In the case of Chinese Communist Party, it represents the vast majority of Chinese population. Today, in the 21st century, in terms of international competition, key criteria is whether in the country you have a political force capable of representing the vast majority of your people. A good example is China has made best use of globalization under the leadership of the party, which serve most Chinese people. So most Chinese are beneficiaries of the globalization, which is not the case with the United States or European countries.
What do you think of the founding principles of CPPCC back in the early 1950s when the PRC was first founded after 3-year civil strife? It came earlier than actually the legislature,
That's
the NPC.
Yeah.
The principles were initially about political participation and mutual supervision. Do you think they still hold water?
Of course, because if you look at the situation prior to 1st October 1949, the founding of the People's Republic, actually political consultative conference was held before the founding of the People's Republic of China.
Exactly.
And
70
that's
years
true,
old.
yeah. It's really a united front around the Communist Party. You have leading personalities from all different political parties, different walks of life.
Based on the consensus that we're going to usher in a bright future with the end of the civil strife.
Yeah, and this line of thinking and tradition is still there, united front aspect of the.
However, over the past decade, since the founding of the PRC, members of the CPPCC or people with no partisan affiliations did go through a dark period of zigzags, setbacks. They paid the price for political participation. Looking back in your hindsight wisdom, what do you think of the Chinese 荣辱与共，肝胆相照? I mean, 荣辱与共 is we share the same hardships, glories, and we are really good friends in the same boat, to translate that punchline into English. But what do you think of the impact of political movements, one after another, on the readiness of these advisors to get involved in China's social development and economic reconstruction?
And essentially, during the Cultural Revolution, CPPCC suffered a lot. Essentially, that was the time of class struggle. So many of the members of the CPPCC were considered class enemies. So in the end, 4 decades ago, it was revived by Deng Xiaoping, and Deng was the first chairman, if my memory serves me right, after 1978,
he
79.
was.
And he said it's extremely important. It's a top-level advisory service. So you are very privileged because you can offer advice directly to the top decision-making body. They come to listen to your opinions on different issues. It proves to be very important. And if you compare, I always joke with my British friends, what's the point of this referendum which ended in Brexit? Let's try consultative democracy. You have to go through several rounds of consultation, or even dozens of rounds of consultation on different issues. We call it from the people, to the people, to the people, from the people. In the end, you reach consensus.
And don't you think, Professor Zhang, that the UK does have the conditions for the kind of elite governance? It prefers to have the elite education. Look at Cambridge and Oxford, look at the royal family and upper class. So instead they turn to the referendum.
I think most British agree with me. It's a class society. So those rich 300 years ago, their descendants are still rich today. China is very different. We call it the People's Republic of China. It's People's Republic. Really, it's the ordinary people have tremendous influence in many ways. If you look at how the agenda setting, how the agenda is set for CPPCC and for National People's Congress, which are coming very soon, with all kinds of opinion surveys. People care about education, people care about pension, about medical reform, about other reform. We do this accordingly. For the United States, you look at the gun control. For decades, no solution.
Because they are protected by the Second Amendment, which is also part of the democracy. That's their rights, despite the Right Act, the Right Bill. Now, Vincent, as a member of the CPPCC, do you really have the freedom of speech in the policy deliberations? Most of that take place in the closed-door discussions.
I would say mostly yes, and that's also important for the CPPCC. It's encouraged to speak out your ideas, your opinions, or your judgment, your suggestions during the whole process.
Does it mean you can openly and freely criticize some of the policy options?
Well, in doing this, I think there is a way you should do it in a constructive way to do it, like Dr. Zhang said.
Does it mean you cannot utterly and thoroughly negate the previous policies?
You cannot use the platform, use the CPPCC to do something which is not in the interest of the country or in line with the mainstream, of this political system. So that's also important.
Right. Now, what are the most important issues facing members of the advisory body at this moment, since we have entered into the new era with the Chinese characteristics, the socialism with Chinese characteristics, with the absolute and unconditional leadership of the Communist Party?
Actually, there are many issues on the agenda. if we look at this CPC proposal for constitutional revision, we mentioned just now social reform, social development. Mm-hmm. The two concepts added, one is called ecological civilization, one is called social civilization. They are political jargons, but they mean a lot for the whole country. So CPPCC will have a lot to do on that. And also the governmental structural reforms. What kind of government institutions should be merged and what should be separated. A lot of things. So what's good is we have a national consensus on what China should go from now on. Now what we discuss is in what way. And CPPCC, since 5 years ago, started a very good practice. It's called the bi-weekly consultative forum. 双周协商座谈. Very good. It's already a brand name. And they discuss down-to-earth issues like e-commerce, like Didi, Chinese Uber, like express delivery. You know, they invite members, experts, companies, state institutions, ordinary workers, and then for 3-4 hours debate, and then they formulate policy documents for the CPC Central Committee.
Vincent, do you believe you and your peers in the non-public sector of the Chinese economy share the same concern that the rights of the property might be endangered since giants like Anbang Insurance has collapsed for one reason or another, and entrepreneurs fear, well, I might be the next. Because in the first stage of the non-public sector's development, inevitably there will be some ambiguity concerning public relations or government relations. But Wu Xiaohui, president of Anbang Insurance, might be just the bad example. Let me have your thoughts on whether you have the sense of safety after the CPPCC, after the CPC central authorities decides to launch an investigation about where the money comes from, whether it's clean money, whether it follows the rules and laws of the government.
Frankly, I'm very safe. I have been safe here doing business for more than 20 years in China after I returned back from the US. Other than that, and I'm very confident in the current system or mechanism of the operational business operational environment in China. That said, that's why so many people, and like I'm one of them, make our career successful, and so many companies has have grown into a large scale. They have become the biggest companies in the whole world, which is good for China. But that said, on the other hand, all of us, whether you are private sector or public sector or state-owned companies, you have to stick to the laws, to the regulations of this country. So that is actually one of the CPC or CPPCC's task. How are we going to have a very good mechanism which is going to govern the operations of everybody, including business entities and the social entities, and also including the government organizations as well. So that is very, very important. I think that's actually the focus of the 2 sessions which is happening right now.
One follow-up question about the future of the non-public sector, particularly in terms of the overseas merger and acquisition in the context of capital control. Do you believe some of the entrepreneurs like Wu Xiaohui have abused their funds in the overseas mergers? Is that part of the outbound capital flight that the government needs to control, to regulate, so that our forex reserves would not be abused?
I believe that's definitely one of the reasons, Anbang is under investigation.
And Wang Jianlin is one of the another cases. One of other cases, right, in terms of overseas investment.
I think it's not only Anbang or Wang Jianlin or whoever. If you are doing business, and everybody should be supervised. Every company should be supervised. If you are doing things right, everything's going to be fine. You know, if you're doing things wrong, and you probably, if it's minor things, you can correct them. And if it's big things, definitely you're going to be, you know, under, you know, detailed investigation to find out how serious the problem is and how much is going to affect the system, the mechanism of this economic, operations of this country. Or if you are, in default, or if you are, make wrong things, if you break the law, you need to be punished by the related, the regulations.
A major part of the mission or mandate of the CPPCC as the top advisory body is to build consensus.
Yeah.
However, when we turn our eyes to one of our major economic competitors, the United States, is of a different nature in terms of how difficult it is to build consensus since China has been reassessed in terms of the global influence with 4 decades of engagement. The Americans, Democrats and Republicans, start to reassess China's influence. They describe China as potentially the most scary strategic competitors. In that way, do you think we have to look at the issue of confidence of both Chinese entrepreneurs and overseas investors in the Chinese market, given their perception about the so-called uncertainty and unpredictability of Chinese politics after the 19th National Congress of the CPC?
Actually, the Chinese system is much more predictable and
than the presidency of Donald Trump.
That's true. Yeah. We have the target for 2020, 2035, 2050. Everything
50 years sharp.
50 years sharp. And so this kind of uncertainty about Chinese intention to educate Chinese is really strange, to be honest. And if China is determined to confront the United States, why should we buy so much U.S. Treasury bonds?
Excuse me, Professor Zhang, we don't want to look at the broad sense of the bilateral relationship. What about the confidence of investors? You need to have a rosy picture or a realistic perception about the market situation here in China before you make up your mind as to whether you sustain your investment here.
In the case of China,
transparency and confidence.
We're very confident. China is arguably the only country in the past 5 years that has made substantial economic reforms and structural reforms. We are clearly orienting our economy towards renewable energies, towards the new industrial revolutions. So what we call the plan into the future. Yeah. So today, China's economy already service-oriented to a great extent, and the new industries represent a huge portion of Chinese economy. So China, all of a sudden, to many Westerns, become innovation superpower. It's true because of 75 years of economic readjustment.
What do you make of the alleged confidence of entrepreneurs and investors? Very quickly.
Well, as Professor Zhang has just mentioned, China has just made so many progresses in so many aspects, which is give everybody confidence. And the factual thing is not only past 5 years, actually in the past 20 plus years, China has been on the fast track development growth. Another important thing actually with the revision or the constitution, which is going to happen quite soon, which is going to make sure the government is going to be more stable here in China. So that is
to promote the transparency and the predictability of the Chinese politics. Thank you so much for your participation in this first edition of Dialogue on Voices of Votes on the annual plenary session of CPPCC, the top advisory body. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time for more of our reports on the same event, the most important political theater in China. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.